They taped a $50 fine to my dad's mailbox the same week he turned 72, right between the birthday card from me and a coupon for denture cream. Name's Michael Mitchell. Corporate lawyer, 44. Still remember the hiss of his porch hose and the smell of that dry Arizona morning when he called holding that pink slip like it was a war medal. On his fridge, a magnet that says kindness is free, so is respect. What do you do when rules stop making sense and start feeling personal? The Arizona sun hadn't even peaked yet when Bill Mitchell spotted the pink slip taped to his old tin mailbox, HOA violation. Improper trash can placement, $50 fine. He stood still in his slippers, the hose still dribbling water onto the flagstones. The neighborhood smelled of early mesquite and chlorine, the usual signs of another dry October morning in Palm Hills. A soft breeze rattled the wind chimes on Cheryl's porch next door, though her blinds were pulled shut. Bill turned the paper over slowly, as if hoping the other side might offer some better explanation. There had been plenty of things in that mailbox over the years: birthday cards, water bills, even handwritten notes from his late wife folded neatly around coupons and old clippings from the Arizona Daily Star. But nothing quite like this thick stock paper bold red border and that unmistakably chirpy HOA logo with the cartoon cactus. It made the whole thing feel like a punishment and a party all in one. He looked up as Pete the mailman ambled down the sidewalk in his usual slow rhythm, one shoulder lower than the other from decades of carrying the satchel. Mornin' Bill Pete called sunglasses catching a glint of light. You see, this Bill held the paper aloft. Pete didn't have to look twice. Yup, same font, same fine. Cheryl got one for her wind chime. Too loud, Bill raised an eyebrow. Apparently woke up a hummingbird, Pete chuckled, but the smile faded quick. New regime. They're citing everything short of bad vibes. Bill folded the notice in half, careful not to crease it too hard. Trash can was out 90 minutes past collection. I timed it. That's about 89 more than they'll allow these days. He walked back up the stone path toward his house, passing his succulent beds, carefully spaced, drought-tolerant, tidy. His wife had planted the first aloe cluster 15 years ago, and he kept it alive out of stubbornness as much as love. The HOA hadn't cared then. Back inside, he set the slip next to his reading glasses and opened the cupboard. The coffee tin was nearly empty, so he spooned what was left into the filter, more habit than necessity. The pot gurgled, filling the kitchen with its earthy hum, a comforting sound in a world that had grown too orderly for its own good. After lunch, Bill walked to the clubhouse. It was only 4 blocks away, but his hip complained all the way there. The HOA bulletin board sat beside the locked front door, framed in plastic, still holding last month's newsletter, and a notice about the upcoming fall potluck. Tucked in the bottom corner was a printout titled Regulation 12.4 Waste Container Protocol. The font was as officious as the fine. He read it twice. Yes, the container must be retrieved within 60 minutes of pickup. Yes, violations incur fines. Yes, repeated offenses may result in property access restrictions. He let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have. From behind him came the low hum of electric wheels. Nancy Crowley cruised up in her white golf cart like a general surveying a parade. Her visor matched her pastel polo shirt, and a small HOA flag fluttered from the back. She slowed as she passed. "Morning, Mr. Mitchell," she said with cheer that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Regulation 12.4. Just keeping us all on track. Why not a warning first?" he asked, not unkindly. "All residents are treated equally," she said, smiling, as if she'd just offered him lemonade. Then she drove on, turning the corner with mechanical precision. Bill stood there a moment longer, reading the bulletin again, wondering when kindness had been rewritten out of the regulations. On the way home, he stopped in front of Cheryl's house. Her wind chimes had gone still, but there was something else flapping gently on her door. Another pink slip. Same font. Same logo. Same $50. The afternoon passed slowly. He watered the lawn again, though it didn't need it. Sat on the porch for a while, the desert heat clinging to the shadows. Dinner was leftover baked ziti. He ate it in silence, fork scraping the ceramic plate with dull rhythm. Afterward, he pulled the HOA charter from the bottom drawer and sat by the lamp glasses perched halfway down his nose. The font was small, the margins tighter than he remembered. He made it 3 pages in before his eyelids started to droop. On the fridge, an old magnet stared back at him. Kindness is free, so is respect. His wife had bought it at a church fundraiser. Later that night, as he turned off the porch light, Pete was still finishing his round down the block. The mail truck rattled slightly as it pulled away. Bill waved lazily. Pete slowed just enough to lean toward him and say, "They're cracking down this month, Mr. Mitchell. Best keep your blinds open." Michael Mitchell handled mergers, buyouts, and legal warfare for a living, but he'd never seen his father so quiet over a $50 fine. The voice on the other end of the phone had been steady, almost offhand. Just a notice from the HOA, Bill had said. Nothing worth getting riled over. But Michael knew that voice. He'd grown up hearing it before every dentist appointment, every school meeting his father didn't want to attend. It was the sound of discomfort dressed in civility. On Friday afternoon, after reviewing quarterly numbers and deflecting 2 boardroom arguments, Michael told Tanya to clear his weekend. Family, he said, short and final. She nodded without asking further. By noon Saturday, he was steering his BMW off the interstate and onto the sun-bleached lanes of Palm Hills. The houses here all looked vaguely beige, unified by stucco and silence. His father's place hadn't changed since his mother passed. The same cactus garden framed the walkway. The same metal mailbox tilted slightly at the curb. Bill opened the door before Michael knocked. He wore his usual collared short sleeve tucked into faded slacks and looked like he had already checked the thermostat 3 times today. "Didn't need to drive all the way down," Bill said, stepping aside. "I brought meatloaf. And something else." Michael held up a photo frame wrapped in a grocery bag. Inside was a picture from 1987, his mother holding a tray of lemon bars, Bill in the background with a rake and a grin. Bill paused when he saw it. "Your mother hated that shirt," he said, but took the frame carefully and set it on the counter like something fragile. They ate in the kitchen where the linoleum still creaked under the same chair legs. Michael noted the ticking wall clock, the rotary phone still mounted next to the fridge, and the smell of iced tea with lemon wedges cut too thick. So Michael said finally, "You got fined over a trash can." It was out an hour and a half past pickup. Regulation 12.4. Bill said it as if reciting from scripture. Michael leaned back. They sent a formal notice. Bill nodded and slid it across the table. Same one Cheryl got for her wind chimes. Michael scanned it. The logo was cartoonish, but the tone was sterile. The kind of document that pretended to be polite while erasing your dignity. He folded it neatly, then sipped his tea. "Back in '92, he said you took the blame when I got detention for putting the trash out early. You were just helping your mom." Michael gave a half smile, but his eyes were already somewhere else. "You ever look into how your HOA structured the charter? Never had to. It was fine under the last guy. They just handled landscaping and pool keys. Things change." That night, after Bill had gone to bed, Michael set up his laptop in the guest room. He connected to the county property database, then cross-checked HOA filings against municipal zoning permits. It didn't take long to find the line he was looking for. Palm Hills Community Clubhouse. Land use agreement, filed 2003. Leased under private title renewable every 10 years. He read it twice. It wasn't owned by the HOA. It was leased. And the current title holder was listed as Redfield Equity Holdings, LLC. Tanya answered his message within minutes despite the hour. "Michael need confirmation. Redfield was folded into us last year, right, Tanya? Yes. Part of the Bellside acquisition. Why, Michael, looks like we own a clubhouse. Tanya, seriously, Michael? Yup, Tanya. Well, technically, they just find a man who owns the floor under their feet." The corner of Michael's mouth twitched. He stared at the HOA charter again, then at the county map. The plot lines hadn't moved. Just the people pretending to draw them. In the morning, he found his father already on the porch with a folded newspaper and a mug of fresh tea. "I checked your thermostat," Bill said. "You keep it at 74 in that fancy office of yours. 72. Michael replied, sitting beside him. They sipped in silence for a moment, watching a lizard chase its shadow across the patio. Michael glanced at his laptop bag, then at his father. They just find the landlord's dad. Bill didn't turn his head. He stirred the ice in his tea with a spoon, thoughtful. Don't make trouble, son, Michael replied gently. Not trouble clarity. Nancy Crowley believed every neighborhood needed a backbone, and she intended to be it. She unlocked the HOA Clubhouse door precisely at 7:55 a.m., 5 minutes earlier than the official board office hours, but Nancy prided herself on leading by example. Her heels tapped firmly against the beige carpet as she crossed the entryway, the smell of lemon cleaner lingering just long enough to reassure her that the janitorial crew had followed last week's revised checklist. Inside her office, she flicked on the overhead lights and took a moment to admire the framed quote above her desk, "Structure builds trust." It had been her campaign motto. The quote was printed in serif gold lettering and centered with painful symmetry between two small potted succulents. Order, she believed, was not just a preference, it was a promise. The desk was already stacked with manila folders, each labeled in her handwriting. Citations. Q4 infractions. Week 1. Mailbox, color palette. Violations. She opened the top folder and began sorting the new batch of citations. One for a hose coiled on a driveway, another for a mailbox with chipped paint, a third for a potted cactus that extended 3 inches beyond the permitted walkway boundary. Eric Deeds entered without knocking. "Morning," he said, his tone habitual rather than cheerful. Nancy looked up, handed him a clipboard. "Bin violations. 4 more this week." Eric adjusted his glasses, scanning the names. Cheryl again. She moved her garden frog statue to the front planter, Nancy said. "It's ceramic. Not approved." He scratched the back of his neck. "Well, it's small." "Palm Hills will not look like a yard sale," Nancy replied, already scribbling a note. "We uphold standards, Eric." June McLean arrived 5 minutes later, her tote bag swinging gently as she took her seat by the filing cabinet. She wore no makeup, but her expression was keen as ever. She looked at the folders on Nancy's desk, at Eric's clipboard, then back to Nancy. Cheryl got cited again. "Yes, non-compliant ornamentation," Nancy said. "She's been warned." June frowned. "It's a frog." Nancy didn't flinch. "Strict compliance. That's what keeps us proud." June said nothing, but her pen tapped softly against her notepad. Nancy swiveled toward the computer and opened the HOA resident database. She typed in Mitchell and narrowed her eyes. "Bill Mitchell," she said aloud. "Trash can violation last week. Nice man. Quiet. But precedent matters." Eric shifted in his seat. "That one rubbed folks the wrong way. Equal rules mean equal treatment. That's our backbone." Nancy scanned the adjacent names, frowning slightly when she reached Michael Mitchell. "Relative?" Eric shrugged. "Son, I think. Doesn't live here." Nancy clicked the name. "No, HOA dues attached. Mailing address listed as a corporate suite in Phoenix." She made a note beside it. "Verify role property relation." She didn't like gaps. Gaps in records, gaps in paint coverage, gaps in logic. Things slipped through gaps. Palm Hills would not slip. She turned back to her desk and pulled out a fresh draft of policy proposal. Proposal, tiered infraction adjustment. First violation, $50. Second violation, $75. Third and above $100, board discretion apply at any stage if community image is deemed at risk. Nancy leaned back satisfied and tapped the pen twice against the desk before circling board discretion in blue ink. She would present it at the next closed-door session. No need to stir unnecessary drama at the potluck. Eric hesitated. Raising fines might not go over well. Order never does. At first, Nancy said. When the meeting adjourned, Nancy returned to her office, emails in hand, 6 subject lines reading, "Concerned resident complaint." She skimmed them, all citing lawn chairs, left-out wind chimes, garden flags. She would address each one, with firmness, with fairness, with form letters. Outside the conference room, June lingered in the hallway. She glanced at the board agenda in her hand, then toward Nancy's closed door. Her eyes lingered on the blue ink still visible through the frosted glass panel. She whispered almost to herself, "She's got no idea who she just poked." Tanya handed Michael the final title file and said, "Technically, they just find a man who owns the floor under their feet." Michael didn't answer right away. He turned the folder twice in his hands, then flipped it open. The county seal was embossed on the header. The legal language was dry, precise, but unmistakable. The Palm Hills Community Clubhouse land was held under a 10-year lease by Redfield Equity Holdings LLC, a shell acquired quietly in last year's Bellside acquisition. His firm owned the clubhouse. He set the file down, leaned back in his chair, and looked out at the office skyline beyond the glass. Phoenix shimmered in the afternoon heat, steel and palm trees sharing space uneasily. In mergers, ownership often passed unnoticed, buried under layers of paperwork and legal transfers. But here, in this quiet little HOA, the implications were very personal. "Tanya," he said without turning, "let's prepare a notice, and check the current lease terms, especially the dispute clauses." Tanya nodded. "Want to include a compliance clause?" Michael smiled faintly. "Let's give them the same courtesy they gave my father, by the book." While Tanya drafted language, he called Bill. It was late afternoon in Palm Hills, and the sun was stretching long shadows across the front porch. Bill answered on the second ring, his voice calm as ever. "I was just sitting down with a glass of iced tea," he said. "You're not going to believe what we found Michael said. He explained it plainly, no legal jargon, that the clubhouse sat on land technically under the control of a holding company, that his firm owned that company, that the HOA didn't own the building they used to host meetings, collect dues, and issue citations." Bill took a slow sip. "That seems inconvenient." "For them," Michael said. "Not us." There was a pause on the line, just the sound of a screen door creaking in the breeze. "I appreciate you digging, son," Bill said finally, "but maybe it's best not to stir the pot too much." Michael leaned forward, elbows on desk. "Sometimes peace needs proper paperwork." Bill didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Across town, Nancy Crowley was reviewing her own batch of citations. One was for a lawn 2 inches over regulation. Another for a resident parking too close to a community mailbox. She signed them quickly, initialing with efficiency. On the corner of her desk, a new note had been added to the board's internal tracking log, "Mitchell William First Offense filed." She didn't notice the name 2 entries down, "McLean Andrew Grass violation, June's nephew." The next morning, Michael reviewed Tanya's edits. The letter was clean, respectful, and firm. It laid out the terms of the lease, the reassignment of controlling interest, and the intent to reevaluate terms, all within legal bounds. It concluded with a phrase he particularly liked. "We welcome dialogue toward renewed alignment." He signed it, handed it to Tanya. "Send it certified, board attention." 2 days later, in the cool of early morning, Pete the mailman approached the HOA office with a white envelope bearing Michael's firm's letterhead and a green certified sticker. Nancy opened it at her desk between emails about decorative mailbox flags and unauthorized Halloween inflatables. Her eyes narrowed as she read, lips tightening. Notice. Effective within 14 days. Clubhouse lease, subject to review under new property title holder. The letter was signed in blue ink, Michael S. Mitchell Iskikur. She stared at the signature, then at the name. This has to be a joke. Dot's Diner hadn't changed in 20 years. The ceiling fan still ticked faintly, the same laminated menus offered meatloaf specials and senior coffee deals, and the booths had the same red vinyl cushions that squeaked under pressure. June McLean walked in not with hunger, but with a quiet urgency. The bell overhead chimed, drawing Dot's brief glance from behind the counter, then back to refilling syrup bottles. June found Michael Mitchell already seated by the window, a half-empty coffee mug in front of him. He stood politely as she approached, motioning for her to sit. "You drink regular or decaf?" he asked. "Decaf," she replied, sliding into the booth. The waitress appeared like clockwork, poured both without a word, and disappeared just as quick. June leaned forward, voice low. "I saw your name in the community log." Then the letter came through. Michael didn't flinch. "We're not trying to start a war, we just want fairness." She stirred her coffee slowly, letting the silence hang between them. Outside, the breeze nudged the awning. Inside, the hum of old conversations created a safe shell for delicate topics. "The clubhouse lease?" "It's yours," she asked. "My firm's," he clarified. "Technically. Acquired in a merger last year." "Technically," she echoed, then sighed. "Nancy's going to implode." Back at the HOA office, Nancy's email pinged across the board's inboxes. Urgent emergency meeting. Thursday, 6 p.m. Eric Deeds frowned at his screen, fiddling with his calculator. "Maybe this is going too far," he mumbled to himself. He didn't reply to the email. Pete delivered letters that morning wearing his usual faded cap. Cheryl caught him by the mailbox. "You know what she did now?" she asked, voice tight. "Find me for my garden frog statue," said it disrupts visual harmony. "Pete, it's ceramic and the size of a grapefruit." Pete offered a sympathetic shrug and leaned on his satchel. "They're tightening up, that's for sure." Cheryl shook her head. "Not just tightening. Gripping." Later that afternoon, the community bulletin board displayed a new flyer carefully taped by Michael with blue painter's tape, "Open HOA discussion. All welcome. Dot's Diner, noon." Nancy spotted it during her post-lunch inspection. She reached for the tape, fingers curling. You can't set a voice behind her. Nancy turned to see June standing by the soda machine. HOA bylaws state any community discussion is allowed on shared boards. Section 3.2. I looked it up. Nancy's hand hovered, then slowly dropped. "You think this is helpful?" she asked evenly. "I think it's overdue." Nancy said nothing, but her shoes clicked harder than usual as she walked away. That evening, Michael stepped onto his front porch to find a plain envelope wedged beneath the welcome mat. No stamp, no return address. He opened it in the kitchen beneath the soft rattle of the ceiling fan and the ticking of Bill's old clock. Inside, a single sheet of paper typed in a bold, narrow font. "She's been fining us to fund her pet project." The smell of deviled eggs and pulled pork couldn't mask the buzz in the room. "Did you hear? The HOA might lose the clubhouse." The Palm Hills Fall. Potluck was usually a cheerful affair. Paper plates stacked beside crock-pots. Neighbors chatting over lemonade and someone inevitably bringing Nancy's favorite three-bean salad. But this year, something different crackled beneath the surface. Conversations were more hushed glances, more watchful. Folding chairs were arranged facing the podium, and a mic perched atop a squeaky stand, its cord trailing like a tripwire. Bill Mitchell arrived with a tub of mashed sweet potatoes and his usual slow smile. Pete waved him over near the dessert table, whispering, "Big one today. She's calling it a special address." Near the front, Michael adjusted a manila folder under his arm, his face calm but alert. June McLean hovered by the punch bowl, greeting residents with warm familiarity. Cheryl stood a few feet back, arms folded, eyes scanning. Nancy Crowley stepped up to the microphone wearing a navy blouse and her HOA name badge. She cleared her throat, and the chatter dimmed. "Good afternoon, Palm Hills," she began. Her voice practiced. "As we gather today, I'm reminded that a neighborhood's strength lies in its order. To maintain that strength, we must evolve with firmer expectations and clearer visual standards." Murmurs. A few brows rose. Frank and Mary exchanged glances. "That's why," Nancy continued, "we're proposing a new resolution to standardize all exterior decor, reinforce property boundaries, and adjust fine structures accordingly." She didn't see Michael step forward until he was beside her. "Ms. Crowley," he said gently, "if I may?" The mic crackled as she hesitated, then stepped aside. Michael spoke plainly. "Before new rules are discussed, the community should understand something important. The clubhouse where we now stand sits on land leased by Redfield Holdings, a firm owned by my office." The silence was instant. In fact, he continued lifting a folder the lease was transferred last year legally and with county approval. The HOA board was notified 2 weeks ago. June stood. I confirmed the documents she added. The lease is valid. Gasps followed, not dramatic, just the collective realization of residents who hadn't been told. Michael turned a page and held up a simple chart. In the last 4 months, HOA fines have increased by 300%. Average monthly citations have tripled. Most were for minor infractions: decorative flags, mailboxes, lawn edges. Cheryl stepped forward. They fined me for a garden frog. Said it was visual clutter. I tried to speak up before. Nancy shut me down. This time, she didn't sit. She stayed standing, and others slowly rose behind her. Frank Mary, even quiet Mr. Lee from Elm Court. Then Bill stood folding his napkin first, clearing his throat. His voice was soft, but every word carried. "My wife used to call this place a pocket of peace," he said. I believed her. But order without kindness is just a cage with good manners. The applause began with a smattering of hands. Then it grew steady, certain, and loud enough to echo off the aging rafters. Nancy's face remained still, but behind her, Eric Deeds quietly set his clipboard down and walked out the side door. Another board member followed. She didn't turn to stop them. Michael stepped back, offering the mic, but no one else moved to speak. In the corner, Nancy leaned toward her stack of neatly printed notes, eyes glazed. She whispered to herself, "They turned on me over a trash can." At sunrise, June opened the HOA mailbox and found a typed letter signed in blue ink. "I resign. Nancy Crowley." There was no envelope. Just the letter folded cleanly, the signature unmistakable. June stood in the quiet parking lot for a moment, the desert morning still cool enough that her breath left a trace in the air. A mockingbird chirped from the Palo Verde tree nearby, and somewhere down the road a sprinkler ticked to life. By 9 o'clock, the notice was taped to the clubhouse door: HOA president resigned. Interim committee forming. June had used a black Sharpie and her neatest print. She resisted the urge to underline anything. Across the neighborhood, the mood was shifting like wind over dune grass. Pete, the mailman, arrived on his usual route with less of a hurry. He stopped at Bill Mitchell's gate, tipping his cap. "Special delivery," he said, handing over a small white envelope. Bill opened it carefully. Inside was a single page on HOA letterhead signed by 3 board members. It read simply, "We apologize for the recent events and thank you for your continued presence in Palm Hills." He folded the letter with slow, precise hands and slid it beneath the sugar bowl on his porch table. Later that morning, Cheryl walked up the front path with a pie tin covered in foil. "Lemon," she said with a smile. "Fresh from my backyard. Figured you were due." Bill smiled back, the kind that rose slowly like memory. "We've missed this porch," Cheryl added as she set the pie down. Michael joined his father around mid-morning. They sat on the porch in the shared hush of desert Sunday. No arguments, no strategies. Just sips of sweet tea and the quiet thrum of birds overhead. "I remember when you built that railing," Michael said, nodding toward the corner where the wood had grayed but held firm. "You were sanding it during my prom photos." "I remember your tux," Bill replied. "Too big by half, but you stood tall in it." June passed by just before noon. She paused at the gate, her clipboard tucked beneath her arm. "We're thinking of reopening the clubhouse," she said. "No badge scans. Just open doors like it used to be." Bill nodded. "About time." That afternoon, a small crowd gathered on the clubhouse lawn. Not for a meeting, not for a complaint. Just quiet curiosity. Bill stepped forward with a short-handled spade and a sapling wrapped in cloth. Cheryl walked beside him, carrying a jug of water. "It's from my husband's tree," she whispered. "Been growing in a pot since he passed." Bill knelt carefully, pressing the blade into the earth, turning dry soil, lifting rocks. When the hole was ready, he unwrapped the sapling and set it in place. The sun crept higher, and neighbors watched from porch steps and sidewalk edges. He tamped the dirt, gently dust clinging to his knuckles. He stood, wiped his palms on his jeans, and looked at the tree. Might take root, might not, but it's worth a try. The sign once read, "Private. Residents with permission only." Now it read, "Welcome. Game night, every Friday." It hung crookedly from a brand-new cork bulletin board outside the clubhouse, pinned beside colorful notes in varied handwriting. Bake sale flyers, dog-walking volunteers. Even one that read, "Frank's Poker Table, Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Bring chips or don't come." Beneath it all, in bold marker, "Community First." June McLean arrived early that morning, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. She unlocked the door with a new key, one issued by the interim committee now comprised of 5 residents elected over pie and lemonade just 2 weeks ago. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and Lysol, a mix that somehow said safe and new. Pete strolled up the walk as she adjusted the chairs inside. "First newsletter's out," he said, handing her a folded stack. Across the top, in large cheerful font, "The Palm Hills Neighbor." June smiled. "We finally have a voice." By noon, the clubhouse was buzzing. Cheryl passed out flyers for baking night lemon bars, pecan pie, whatever your grandma used to make. A couple of teenagers zipped by on rollerblades, weaving between planters and waving to Michael as he pulled into the drive. "Is that the lawyer guy?" one whispered. "That's Bill's son," the other replied, as if it explained everything. Michael stepped out of the car in jeans and a t-shirt, holding a folder. He found June near the bulletin board. "Lease agreement," he said, offering the folder. $1 a year. With a clause, community use must stay free and equal. June blinked. "You could have charged a fortune." He shrugged. Dad would have hated that. Inside, residents laughed, sipped iced tea, and signed up for volunteer shifts. Even Cheryl's wind chime, once cause for a $25 fine, now jingled faintly by the doorway, a new symbol of change. At sunset, Bill Mitchell sat beneath the lemon sapling on a folding lawn chair, cup of tea in hand. The clubhouse was alive behind him. Music, footsteps, the occasional squeak of a folding table leg. Across the street, a familiar sedan slowed. Nancy Crowley sat at the wheel, her posture straighter than ever. She didn't park. But for a moment, she looked toward the lights, the laughter, the new sign on the lawn. Her lips twitched almost a smile. Then the car eased forward and vanished around the bend. Bill took a sip, eyes drifting back toward the bulletin board. Suggestion box, what should we do next? He smiled. That's more like it. In the quiet golden hours of a fall evening, laughter returned to the clubhouse that once echoed with rules instead of voices. It wasn't about fines or authority anymore. It was about folks gathering again, sharing pie stories, and a sense of belonging. Sometimes the gentlest resistance, a question, a clause, a shared porch, is enough to remind power of its place. When rules are used to lift people up, a community grows stronger. When they weigh people down, even the smallest voices can rise to rewrite them. So, if your own neighborhood has grown too quiet, maybe it's time to check the bulletin board and ask what comes next.